why this principle works actually starts to show up in some of the things that we'll be discussing today. So to begin, let's think about where learning might occur. And what I'd like you to do is please list for yourself, so take out a piece of paper or do this on your computer, list for yourself 3 to 5 examples of situations in which learning occurs. And I'll give you a minute to do that. And once you have your list, please categorize each example by adding the word kind or wicked. And then please share all of your examples via the chat box. And while you're chatting, please have your response addressed to everyone so we can all see your responses. Okay, good. You can continue adding. I'm going to move on. We have a couple polling questions that we'd like to proceed with. Laura's going to present the poll to us. Question number 1 is, I would describe the learning environment at my elementary school as kind or wicked. Please select a response.
Eric, do you want 1 minute on your pollings? Something we didn't talk about.
On these 30 seconds at the most. All we have to do is select one response and click submit.
So there you go.
Okay, I'm not seeing the responses. Where is that? There we go. All right, so we have 100% response on, I'm going to make that note, on kind. How would you describe the learning environment in my elementary school? Polling question number 2 is, learning environments for activities such as chess, golf, football, etc. are A, kind, or B, wicked? Again, 30 seconds for this is good. So we have 44% for kind and 56% for wicked. Interesting. All right. So polling question number 3, learning environments for domains such as financial markets, Martian exploration, hiring employees, COVID-19 pandemic, etc. Kind or wicked? All wicked. That's great. And this next one, Laura, you could do a minute, not just 30 seconds on this one.
Okay.
So on polling question number 4, what are characteristics that distinguish kind learning environments from wicked? And you can click more than one response on this option, on this question.
Give it just a few more seconds here for people
Okay.
to read through. I'm going to go ahead and share what we have here. Are you able to see that, Eric?
I can. That's great. All right. Is this something you can leave up?
I can bring it back, I think.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to walk through the first 3 questions, the first couple questions. So in the response to how would I describe the learning environment as my elementary school? Typically, and everybody responded 100% kind. That's a typical viewpoint of those learning environments. The characteristics that we addressed in polling question number 4 are all attributes that make that a kind learning environment. And actually, the same goes for activities such as chess, golf, football, etc. So if we look at what's going on there, the feedback timing in all those events activities is rapid. The patterns are repeating. The rules are known. They're not unclear. The feedback accuracy is good. The experience, it reinforces the correct lessons versus the wrong lessons. There's repetition in what's occurring in that environment. The results are known and the boundaries are well defined. So all these elements in this polling question number 4 are actually characteristics that help us distinguish from one perspective or another, kind from wicked learning environments. Learning environments in these domains are typically, and everybody said this, wicked. It's very hard to be able to connect cause and effect relationships and learn effectively, quickly from these things. So this is a chart that you may find supports your learning today. You can use this chart that was sent to you or a form of it to capture your observations. And it would be useful to make notes as we go through if you want to understand additional distinctions that we have about our discussion. So I'm going to move on unless somebody has a question or comment they want to make to us all. No? Okay. So take a look at your original list of 3 to 5 learning environments. For those environments that you categorized as kind learning environments, what are some of the things that these examples have in kind or common with regard to rules, quality of feedback, both the relevance and irrelevance of the feedback, timing of or delays between actions and feedback, the accuracy of the feedback, the activities performed, the boundaries of the activity or the world within which they're occurring, as well as the consequences of errors. Are they exacting or are they lenient? So most kind learning environments can be characterized by or being described as being rule-bound, time-bound, with nearly immediate feedback on the effects of your actions. The feedback is clear. And places that are typical examples of kind learning environments are classrooms, sport practice fields, and online instruction, although some of you said online was probably a wicked environment. I think using the tools might be a wicked environment sometimes, yeah. And then, I mean, learning environments that you described as wicked, what are some of the things that these examples have in common with regard to the same types of things? Rules, quality of feedback, timing of actions, accuracy of feedback, boundaries, and consequences. Now, in wicked learning environments, luck or chance has more impact than rules do. Time frames between actions and effects can range from hours to decades, sometimes even longer. And feedback on the effects of your actions is at best unclear and often misleading, reinforcing the wrong actions. Underlying dynamics of the system of causes may remain invisible to a learner. So one example of a common wicked learning environment might be an executive giving attaboys to a group for performance that is within control limits, or in other words, the system is expected to produce those results and not worthy of special cause acclaim. So Danny Kahneman said, if you want to characterize how something is done, then one of the most powerful ways of characterizing how the mind does anything is by looking at the errors the mind produces while it's doing it, because the errors will tell you what it is doing. Correct performance tells you much less about the procedure than the errors do. Now, there is a famous New York physician in the early 20th century who was renowned as a skillful diagnostician. This man's particular specialty was typhoid fever, and he examined his patients for it by feeling around their tongues with his hands. Again and again, his testing method yielded a positive diagnosis before the patient displayed a single symptom. And over again, his diagnosis turned out to be correct. Repetitive success, it turned out, taught him the worst possible lesson. As another physician later pointed out, he was a more powerful, productive carrier using only his hands than Typhoid Mary. So this is an example of a wicked learning environment where the feedback this diagnostician was getting was irrelevant to his actions, and the consequences of his errors were exacting. So when we came up with our earlier examples of learning environments, we used the assumptions we have about what it means to learn. Let's think about that. What does it mean to learn? What's required for learning to occur? And why is learning important in our organizations? You know, a curious 4-year-old might say something like, well, what's that? An 8-year-old can be heard to say, I'm doing an experiment. Curiosity and experimentation are inherent in how we first learn through exploration and testing. Later, we're instructed by a teacher who essentially says, "Tell me the correct answer." In other words, give me back the marble I just handed to you. High school and college students come to expect that there's a right answer for all questions, and guessing what is in the teacher's mind seems to be a waste of time. Now, memory plays a fundamental role in all types of learning. The formation of memories begins with our perceptions. Our perceptions of the world are created by inputs from sensory motor movements. These inputs are perceived as sequences of patterns. Thus, our memories are made up of sequences of patterns from the entirety of our perceptions. Not only those things of which we are conscious, but the entire context we are experiencing. We develop models of everything we experience in the world. We use models of the world to predict our next perceptions. What we perceive as memories are always reconstructed, not retrieved, sequences of patterns. Thus, new experiences, knowledge, and stories are continually combined with existing memories. Daniel Kahneman also tells us that the confidence people have in their beliefs is not a measure of the evidence, but of the coherence of the story that the mind has managed to construct. We use our memories, those sequences of patterns, to build models of everything in our world. Right now, you have a model of the chair you are sitting in, the desk or table you are seated or standing in front of, and of the room you are in. If you have a cup on your desk, you can touch it with your eyes closed and without surprises, follow the shapes and turns of the material, knowing what you will encounter with each turn. The models of the world you carry in your brain tell you where you are and what you should expect to perceive next. Our brain uses cells called grid cells to provide us with location information for our models of the world. Location in this sense is an expansive term in this context, meaning location relative to other things in a model. The model could be of your computer keyboard with precise knowledge of each key location. Location can also be applied to logical concepts such as the spelling of words. Those of you who participated in the CQI IQI Academy's learning curve experiment were primed to activate and then strengthen a specific model by repeatedly printing the phrase learning organization 15 times. When you were then asked to print only every other letter in the phrase, the active model in your mind made you move through the location of every letter in the first phrase before arriving at the correct letters to print. A grid cell is a type of cell or neuron that exists in an older part of the brain involved in navigation. Grid cells represent the location of a body as it moves. Animals have been tracking their location and navigating their environments for millions of years thanks to grid cells. Recent experimental evidence suggests that grid cells known as cortical grid cells are present in the neocortex. The research firm Numenta proposes that the neocortex uses cortical grid cells to learn the structure of objects in the same way that the older part of the brain uses grid cells to learn the structure of environments. Meaning that we learn about objects by modeling them as a set of locations and about object behaviors as a series of displacements. We are always building and updating our models of the world. Some of our models are useful while others are incomplete or simply wrong. Many of our models can be separated into two types, territory or path. Trying a new way of working is like getting lost in an unfamiliar environment. To better understand the difference between the two types of models, we can compare the 20-year careers of a London bus driver and a London cabbie. People and organizations who find themselves can find themselves, like a veteran London bus driver, knowing one route exceedingly well. A bus driver who's driven her route for 20 years will know all there is to know about that route. What impact bad weather will have, who are her regulars and what are their stops, the timing of the lights at every intersection, the old and new businesses along the route, and so on. For 20 years, the London bus driver has traveled back and forth along her route. A 20-year veteran London cabbie, on the other hand, knows the entire city backwards and forwards. Give him any starting point and he will be able to tell you the quickest route to any destination in the city, along with 3 good alternate routes if need be. The veteran bus driver, if asked to find her way to a strange new neighborhood, can quickly get lost because her experience has been limited to the single path she has been following for 20 years. A bus driver has an expert path model. The cabbie has an expert territory model. According to Numenta founder and neurotheorist Jeff Hawkins, our brain builds models of the world by creating maps or reference frames for those things, physical and conceptual. When faced with organizational change, our maps, our reference frames determine whether we find ourselves lost or capable of discovering a new path. In the psychology of lost people, those with strong path or route knowledge and weak territory or survey knowledge are often unaware, this is interesting, unaware of their limited knowledge until they find themselves off the path and lost. So most of the time we think we're doing just fine until we find ourselves lost and we realize, oh, there's something I didn't know about the world I'm living in, or the organization I'm working in, or the process I'm trying to improve. And once lost, those people many often display behaviors that we see in lost people are the same of people experiencing organizational change. So fear of new territory, fear of getting lost, not knowing where to turn or how to act, banding together, and arousal high enough to interfere with mental functioning. Perception is predictive means that as we move through and experience the world, our brain is performing double duty, both sensing and interpreting inputs, as well as making predictions based upon our models about what will be sensed next. The more certain we are about our environment and about what we are sensing, the less brain energy is devoted to predicting the next series of inputs. And this relates to that learning principle we introduced at the beginning of our session. Walter Lippmann observed, while they governed and fought, traded, and reformed in the world as they imagined it to be, they produced results or failed to produce any in the world as it was. So our models have a powerful impact on our ability to actually produce results. And the more effective our models are, and the more useful and broad in scope they are, the more useful. So our perceptions, which are created by movement, become memories. Those memories are retained sequences of patterns. It is those sequences of patterns that become models of the world we use to predict our next perceptions. Some of this material can be found on numenta.com. It's a very interesting and useful website. Jeff Hawkins, who I mentioned earlier, is the founder of Numenta. He wrote the book On Intelligence. He's coming out with a new book next spring called The Thousand Brains Theory that describes how the multiple models of the world are retained and used in our brains. And one of those aspects of the multiple models is sparse distributed representations, meaning the models we build in our world are not stored in a single location, but retained in multiple cortical columns throughout the brain. And in a powerful approach to pattern recognition, our brain quickly interprets and evaluates the many sensory inputs that we receive. And then in essence, different parts of our brain vote to settle on what is it we're experiencing. I had an experience one time. I'm driving down the freeway and I look off onto a field and glance at something that I think is the ugliest horse I've ever seen. My brain or my eyes captured a quick glance of what shape that was. And then as I drove closer to it, I realized, well, that's not a horse, it's a cow. But immediately my brain made an interpretation and said something about what it was I was viewing. And then only later did it update and say, whoops, like we made a mistake. What we voted on, we thought was a horse, an ugly horse, turned out to be a cow, and a pretty good looking cow at that. So what we want to look at is how are we building our models and retaining information about them. And it doesn't take much information for our brain to start to begin to use very little inputs to make a determination about what we think we're experiencing. Now, at the beginning of our session, we created and categorized our learning environment examples. And we were using assumptions we have about what it means to learn, including what it means to retain and recall knowledge. During and immediately following an event, our memory of that event seems clear and occurs to us as if it will be indelibly etched in our mind. As time passes, our ability to recall facts and events begin to diminish. They begin to blur a little together. And a factor that influences our memories is the distance that time places between an experience we have had and when we want to recall it. Our recall of previous events is always a reconstruction. And like reconstruction or remodeling of our home, we use a combination of old and new materials, blending what was with what has happened and what is happening. Our brain functions to ensure that we know where we are and that we remain safe at all times. The best way to do this is to incorporate new sensory motor inputs immediately with everything else we have experienced in life so far. We are very good at dealing with the here and now, but over time, patterns that were once distinct become blurred, and we become less effective at identifying helpful cause and effect relationships. And then another aspect of learning was recently published. When we learn, at first, the brain tends not to produce new activity patterns. This is fascinating, at least to me. But to repurpose the activity patterns it already knows how to generate. It's like we have little Lego blocks, and we learn over the course of the learning over the course of a few hours is suboptimal because it's not new patterns, but we're trying to repurpose existing patterns. When first learning something new, our brain doesn't seem to be able to change its activity in the best possible way to allow us to be proficient at new skills. In the book, Make It Stick, there's an example of fire jumpers, those men and women who parachute out of airplanes to battle forest fires. They jump in a particular way. They're trained to use their parachutes and their landing techniques in a certain method. They say that those people who have been trained in the military schools for parachute skills can't learn how to jump correctly for the purposes of firefighting. It's very interesting because those skills are so indelibly etched in their brain, they can't rewire what's been happening. So oftentimes we find it's very challenging to relearn something because we're trying to put it on top of existing memory patterns. Another concept is this aspect of work environments can be designed to be kind and then be made wicked by management or other folks. One example is a warehouse operation at a small job shop and parts distributor here in Michigan. Rules for adding and removing inventory are clear. When the rules are followed, the inventory system provides accurate data. Shop personnel are able to get the parts they need when they need them for customer repairs. Inside salespeople can look up inventory quantities while a customer is on the phone and they can make sales quickly. However, when rules aren't followed, the environment shifts from kind to wicked. Essential parts for customer repairs are not available, even though the warehouse management system says they are. Inside salespeople stop depending upon the data on their computer screens and leave their desks to walk over to the warehouse to physically check inventory. They even squirrel away parts just in case. All that's needed to make this kind warehouse operation and environment unpredictable and for it to become wicked is for its users is one maverick employee who does not follow the rules for ordering, storage, and removal of parts. The actions of one employee with a tacit support of his management transforms what people expect to be a kind working environment into a wicked one in which their actions cannot be counted on to produce predictable results. Many of you I know can think of examples where that's the case in your world. We have a design and a structure that is really meant to be kind, but because people are not following the process, it's turned into a wicked environment that we can't predict the outcomes of our actions easily or reliably. So one of the questions we have is, well, what sort of learning environment will be useful? You know, what world will people be working in, making decisions within, and needing to learn from? So learning design for wicked learning environments, which is most of our work life really, comprehends and takes into account some very important principles. These include cause and effect are distant or separated in time and space. Motivation is complex, multidimensional, situational, and historical. And origins of circumstances are multiple, independent, contextual. A primary result of this principle is that, for the most part, even though much of our formal learning is done within kind learning environments, the world in which we live is wicked, with variable factors and interactions that are unknown, making luck a prime driver in the fortunes and outcomes that we experience. Jim Collins includes both what luck and who luck when he estimates that luck may play an 80% role in the fortunes of our organizations. So before we move on to some quick review of some basic concepts of the distinctions between wicked and kind learning environments, any questions that anybody wants to present or ask about? So from Christine, what was the book that you recommended about how we rewire our brains? There's the book at the beginning of the course was around called Make It Stick. The other book was On Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins. And we can, that one's, some aspects of that they've learned from since then. So I would recommend also going to nomenta.com to look at some of that work. Yeah, Make It Stick and not Megan Stick. That's right. That's right.
Christine, that's funny.
Make It Stick. Yeah. All right. Anything else? All right. I'm going to move through some of these principles fairly quickly. And then it's in a list. It's the other file, not the chart, but the list of distinctions that we have that were sent ahead of time. So you can make notes or check something that you want to ask about as we go through this. But I'm gonna let the images scroll through fairly quickly. So what we choose to focus on how our vision is used, what we tend to experience, take in, or absorb in either environment, how we approach thinking, what we tend to act with, the basics of our knowledge, how we can describe our participation, what we use for guidance, the extent of possibilities, the quality of our interactions, what's the basis for planning, how we evaluate decision quality, useful teaching methods, the types of social collaboration that occurs, our view of outcomes, our perspectives about strengths and weaknesses. And again, you might want to take a minute to update your chart with your observations you've made or questions you developed during the session. So you go back to this, trying to solve a problem before being taught the solution leads to better learning. So if we, among the reasons this principle works is our brain attempts to quickly connect sensory motor inputs with known sequences of patterns. Unknown patterns cause more of our brain to become engaged, to work harder to recognize what it's experiencing. So when we're faced with something unfamiliar or we're trying to figure something out, more of our brain is active. MRIs have shown this quite often, that as soon as something unfamiliar occurs for someone, boom, more areas of the brain are activated. As soon as we agree on or think we know what's going on, less of our brain is active. Working to solve a problem with an unknown answer primes neural connections for learning by activating more of them. Sequences of patterns that form at once a solution is observed, once a solution is observed, appear to be more durable. So in other words, they stick. Ways to implement this, and we do this during the academy, is during instruction, like we did at the beginning of this session, we ask people to solve a problem before they're able to even presented with the concepts of how to address it. You can also address this through work-related specific projects. Trying to make an improvement without knowing how to make the improvement is one of the best ways to actually drive learning. Use of formal predictions about changes being tested is a good way. And then a way to even make those predictions and learning stick is use of betting on the accuracy of the predictions. That one is a useful lesson from Annie Duke from her book called Thinking in Bets. So that's the end of my formal piece of the presentation and conversation. I'd like to thank you for participating today. If you'd like a copy of the slides that I've created for this webinar, send a request to my email, eric@qualityandinnovation.org, and I will send you a copy of the visuals that I used today. Let's see. If you identify that your learning environments are wicked, what do you think is the most impactful thing you can do to try to move your learning environment to kind? I'm not sure you can switch the environment from wicked to kind. There are ways to move elements of the environment from wicked to kind. I think one of the things we do in most of our efforts in lean manufacturing and lean office changes is to drive it towards, I guess I'm rephrasing that. We try and drive parts of our organizations and parts of our processes from wicked to kind by creating the structures and accountability that standard processes, standard work, and standard methods allow us to do that. So the environment becomes predictable, feedback becomes much more immediate. So by shrinking the boundaries around which we're working and then making something countable as a way of provide input, get an output, is that what we want? Those kind of things. I guess that is one of the ways that we could drive a wicked environment towards a kind environment. And then you can start to expand that from the work area to the department to the organization, that sort of thing. So that would be off the top of my head one way to address that kind of approach.